I need to get this off my chest. Here's what happened. My wife, Lindsay, cheated on me. Not with some random stranger or ex-lover, but with our family dentist. Yes, the one who treats cavities and lectures us about flossing. How did this happen? I am an ordinary guy with an ordinary life, at least I thought so. Married for 12 years, 2 children, 7 and 10 years old, and what I thought was a strong relationship. But life threw me such a curveball that I'm still trying to recover from it. It all started about 6 months ago. Lindsay decided she wanted to be more self-aware, and that somehow included having perfect teeth. She started making more appointments with Dr. Eric Walker, our local dentist. At first, I didn't pay much attention to it. Lindsay has always been the type to obsess over random things, so I chalked it up to her not being herself. But then her visits became strangely more frequent. Like, who needs to go to the dentist twice a month? When I joked about it, she snapped, saying, "Why don't you take care of your health the same way I do?" Classic Lindsay duck and strike. Anyway, I let her go. But I didn't know that these meetings were not just about teeth. Over time, I noticed that Lindsay was spending more and more time on her phone, texting someone with this giddy, annoying smile on her face. I'd ask who it was, and she'd give me some lame answer like, "Oh, just mom's from the PA." It was strange, but again, I trusted her. Looking back, I feel like an idiot. The signs were there: the sudden interest in dental health, the extra effort in her appearance before so-called meetings, and the way she came home later than usual, acting strange and distracted. I ignored all of this because I didn't want to believe that my wife was capable of something like this. But what I didn't know was that she wasn't just crossing borders, she was destroying them. As I said, Lindsay was spending a lot more time on self-care, which basically meant obsessing over her teeth and appearance. She went to the dentist looking like she was about to walk the red carpet, makeup, hair, clothes that, frankly, seemed too revealing for the dental office. I even made a joke about it once, saying, "What's next, a strap-in?" She just rolled her eyes and said, "I don't understand what women are like." Okay, sure. The weirdest part? She started making excuses for things that didn't even make sense. She told me that her cleanings were taking a long time because Dr. Walker is so thorough, or that she was helping him organize the office. Who voluntarily stays after a cleaning to help a dentist organize something? But every time I asked her a question, she would explode, calling me insecure, or accusing me of not appreciating how much effort she puts in for our family. And the lies, oh God, the lies. I didn't pick up on it right away, but things started to fall apart when she couldn't keep her stories straight. One day she told me she had an appointment at 3 p.m. But then a friend of mine who works near the office mentioned that he saw her car parked there at 6 p.m. When I brought it up later, she claimed she met a friend, and they were just chatting in the parking lot. Yeah, of course they did. Because that's perfectly normal. But what was the turning point? One day I was folding laundry, because Lindsay didn't bother with it anymore, too busy with her meetings, and then her phone buzzed on the counter. I'm not a fan of peeking, but this message caught my attention. "I can't stop thinking about yesterday. You're amazing." It was from a number not saved in her contacts. I froze. My stomach churned. I picked up the phone, and as I scrolled through it, I realized it didn't take a genius to piece it all together. The messages were flirty, playful, and full of jokes clearly not PDA material. And the sender? Dr. Eric Walker. Still, I didn't argue with her right away. I decided to hold off, gather more evidence, and find out what the hell was really going on. I had no idea how deep the rabbit hole would go and how confusing events would turn out to be. But believe me, when the truth finally came out, all the warning signs I had ignored seemed like a tiny spark compared to the explosion to come. After seeing those texts, I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. I needed to know how far this had gone. Was it just some weird flirtation, or had they crossed the line I couldn't ignore? The problem was, Lindsay was the queen of spinning things to suit her. If I confronted her too soon, she'd just gaslight me into thinking I was crazy. So, I decided to dig deeper. I started by paying closer attention to her habits. She always kept her phone glued to her side, but now I noticed how she'd angled the screen away from me anytime I walked by. She also started making more quick runs to the store, which conveniently coincided with when Eric's office was closed. One evening, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Lindsay had told me she was meeting a friend for coffee, so I waited until she left and headed straight to Eric's office. I wasn't entirely sure what I was looking for, but I parked down the street and watched. Sure enough, about 20 minutes later, Lindsay's car pulled up. My heart was pounding in my chest as I saw her get out, glancing around like she was in some bad spy movie. She walked up to the office door, knocked twice, and Eric opened it. They both looked around before slipping inside, and that's when it hit me, this wasn't just flirting. They were sleeping together. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Part of me wanted to storm in there and confront them on the spot, but I stopped myself. I needed more than just suspicions. I needed proof that Lindsay couldn't talk her way out of. The next day, I started quietly asking around. A buddy of mine works as a private investigator, and I reached out to him for advice. He told me he'd help me out, discreetly of course, and set up a few cameras outside Eric's office. It felt insane to go this far, but I wasn't about to let Lindsay walk all over me while pretending everything was fine. In the meantime, I acted as normal as I could at home. But every little thing she did started to grate on me. The way she'd smile at her phone, the fake cheerfulness when she'd tell me about her day, the way she'd casually lie about where she'd been, it all made my blood boil. A week later, my buddy called me. "You're not going to like this," he said. He sent me the footage. Lindsay and Eric were meeting up after hours, sneaking into his office, and let's just say they weren't exactly discussing dental hygiene. I wish I could say I was shocked, but honestly, I'd already known deep down. What I didn't know was just how brazen they were about it. The anger I felt was like nothing I'd experienced before, but I held it together. I had one goal now, to catch them in the act and make sure there was no escaping the truth. I'd seen enough. The footage confirmed everything I'd been dreading. My wife wasn't just having an affair, she was blatantly lying to my face while sneaking around with this smug, overconfident dentist. I decided it was time to confront her, but not until I had undeniable, in-your-face proof. I told my buddy, the private investigator, to keep the cameras rolling and let me know if anything big happened. I didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, Lindsay told me she had a PDA meeting. I just nodded, pretending to buy the lie, and watched her leave the house. As soon as she was out the door, I grabbed my car keys and headed straight for Eric's office. This time, I wasn't waiting in the car. I parked nearby and crept up to the side of the building. The blinds were mostly shut, but the office lights were on, and through a small gap, I could see shadows moving. My heart was racing, my hands trembling, but I kept quiet. Then I heard it, laughter, followed by muffled voices. And then, unmistakable sounds of them having sex. I couldn't believe it. There they were, in his office, desecrating the same place where he'd once cleaned my kids' teeth. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart, not mine. I wasn't sure what to do. Should I bust in right then and there? Should I call the cops? Instead, I did the only thing that made sense in that moment. I whipped out my phone and started recording. After a few minutes, I'd seen more than enough. I walked back to my car, shaking with anger and adrenaline, and sat there trying to calm myself down. I wanted to march in there, scream at them, make them feel the humiliation I was feeling. But something inside me told me to hold off. Instead, I drove home and waited. When Lindsay got back a couple of hours later, she had the audacity to act like everything was fine. She kissed me on the cheek, said the meeting ran long, and then went upstairs to shower. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone, the video I'd recorded playing on a loop in my mind. I didn't sleep that night. I just kept replaying everything she'd said, every lie, every excuse, and it all added up to one undeniable fact. My wife wasn't just unfaithful, she was a pathological liar who had zero respect for me or our marriage. The next day, I called my lawyer. I knew it was time to start the process of divorce, but I wasn't about to let Lindsay get off easy. I had a plan, and trust me, it was going to be messy. When I walked around to the side of the building, I found a back entrance slightly ajar. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might burst out of my chest. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. The office was eerily quiet, except for the faint sounds of movement coming from one of the rooms. I followed the noise, my hands shaking, and stopped outside a door that was barely cracked open. And there they were. Lindsay was on Eric's desk, half-dressed, and they were fully engaged in the act. It was surreal, like I was watching some twisted scene in a bad drama. They didn't even notice me standing there. At first I froze. Part of me didn't want to believe this was real, but the rage building inside me quickly took over. I pushed the door open, and the loud slam startled them both. Lindsay let out a panicked shriek and scrambled to cover herself, while Eric stood there like a deer caught in headlights. "What the hell is this?" I shouted, my voice shaking with anger. "Are you serious right now? In your office?" Lindsay's face went pale, and then she did what she always does, she started lying. "It's not what it looks like. I can explain." "Oh, really?" I shot back, pulling out my phone. "Because I've got video proof that says otherwise." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. Eric, on the other hand, had the nerve to try and calm me down. "Listen, man, let's just talk about this like adults." I cut him off. "Adults? You're screwing my wife in your office, and you think we're going to talk about this? You're a joke." Lindsay, realizing she couldn't talk her way out of it, switched gears and started screaming at me. "This is your fault, you know. You never paid attention to me. You're always so boring and predictable." That's when I lost it. "So your solution was to have sex with our dentist? In the same office where you get your teeth cleaned? Do you even hear how insane you sound?" I didn't stick around to hear more excuses or Eric's pathetic attempts to mediate. I walked out, slamming the door behind me. On the drive home, I could still hear Lindsay's voice echoing in my head, blaming me for her actions. That night, I didn't say a word to her when she came home. She tried to act like the victim, sobbing and begging me to understand, but I was done. I told her I was filing for divorce, and no amount of tears or screaming was going to change my mind. The morning after I dropped the D word, Lindsay was gone when I woke up. Her side of the bed was cold, and the house was eerily quiet, too quiet. I figured she'd gone off to sulk or regroup at her sister's place, maybe tried to come up with some grand scheme to make me the bad guy. I thought I'd have some peace to process everything, but I should have known better. Around noon my phone buzzed. Not a call, not a text, an email. From Lindsay. The subject line? "You owe me an explanation." Against my better judgment, I opened it. The message was long, filled with her usual nonsense about how I neglected her, how she felt trapped in our marriage, and how Eric wasn't the problem, I was. She even had the audacity to blame me for snooping on her in the first place, as if catching her cheating was somehow worse than the cheating itself. I laughed bitterly and deleted the email. But then the texts started coming. First from her, then from her sister, and eventually, from her mother. Each one angrier than the last. "Why are you doing this to Lindsay? She's heartbroken. You're making a mistake you'll regret forever. Be a man and work this out." Be a man? If I hadn't been holding my phone, I might have thrown it across the room. By mid-afternoon, I decided I needed a break from the circus. I grabbed my keys and headed to the one place where I could think, the park by the lake. Sitting there, watching the ducks paddle around like they didn't have a care in the world, I let myself feel it all, the anger, the betrayal, the hurt. For a moment, I wondered if I'd been wrong to act so decisively. Should I have stayed, fought for the marriage? But then I remembered the look on her face in that office. The lies, the excuses, the complete lack of remorse until she realized she'd been caught. And I knew there was no going back. By the time I got home, though, Lindsay had escalated. She was there, sitting on the couch, looking like she'd rehearsed the scene 100 times. Her eyes were red, her makeup smudged, and a glass of wine sat untouched on the coffee table. "I want to talk," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't," I replied, brushing past her. But Lindsay wasn't having it. She grabbed my arm, forcing me to face her. "You don't get to just walk away from this," she yelled. "We've been together for 10 years. That has to mean something." "Yeah, it means you should have thought about that before you slept with Eric," I shot back, pulling free from her grip. "I made a mistake, okay? People make mistakes," she pleaded. "Sure," I said, turning to face her fully. "But this wasn't a mistake, Lindsay. It was a choice. A series of them. And now you have to live with the consequences." She broke down then, sobbing uncontrollably, but I didn't feel sorry for her. I couldn't. When she realized her tears weren't working, she switched tactics. "If you leave me, you're going to ruin everything. You'll destroy us both." I sighed, feeling the weight of her words. "Well, Lindsay, you destroyed us. I'm just making sure we don't drown in the wreckage." And with that, I walked away, leaving her sitting there in the ruins of what we used to be. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The calm didn't last long. By the next day, Lindsay had gone nuclear. It started with a call from my boss. He sounded uncomfortable, the kind of tone people use when they're about to tell you something you really don't want to hear. "Hey, so I got a weird email this morning," he began. My stomach dropped. "Weird how?" He cleared his throat. "Well, it was from your wife. Or I guess soon-to-be ex-wife? She's claiming you've been emotionally abusive and financially controlling. She sent it to HR, too." I had to sit down. "Are you serious right now? I wish I wasn't." He paused. "Look, I don't know what's going on between you two, but you might want to get ahead of this before it spirals. HR's going to want to talk to you." I hung up, my mind racing. Emotional abuse? Financial control? Lindsay was rewriting the narrative to paint herself as the victim, and she wasn't stopping there. By the time I got to work, my coworkers were giving me sideways glances. A couple of them muttered half-hearted greetings, but most just avoided me altogether. Word was spreading, and fast. When I finally sat down with HR, they handed me a printed copy of the email. It was worse than I imagined. Lindsay had thrown every accusation she could think of at the wall, hoping something would stick. She claimed I'd isolated her, refused to let her work, and even suggested I'd been tracking her movements. "Do you have anything to say in response to these claims?" the HR rep asked, her expression unreadable. I leaned back in my chair, trying to keep my voice steady. "None of it's true. She's retaliating because I told her I'm filing for divorce. If you need proof, I can provide it." The rep nodded, but her face remained neutral. "We'll investigate the matter. In the meantime, we ask that you remain professional and avoid discussing personal matters with your colleagues." "Of course," I replied, though the urge to shout my side of the story from the rooftops was overwhelming. The rest of the day was a blur. By the time I got home, I was exhausted, mentally, emotionally, physically. But Lindsay wasn't done. She'd left another bombshell waiting for me, a stack of legal documents on the dining table. Divorce papers. At first, I thought it was her way of agreeing to end things quickly. But when I flipped through the pages, I realized what it really was, a power play. She was demanding half of everything, the house, my retirement savings, even my dog, Max. I sank into a chair, staring at the papers in disbelief. Max? Really? As if on cue, Lindsay strolled in, dressed like she was heading to some high-powered negotiation instead of a conversation with her soon-to-be ex. "See? I'm being reasonable," she said, gesturing to the papers like they were a peace offering. "Reasonable?" I echoed, my voice rising. "You want half of everything, including Max? He's my dog, Lindsay. You don't even like him." She crossed her arms, her expression cold. "I'm entitled to my share. And if you try to fight me on this, I'll make sure you lose more than just the dog." I stood up, my fists clenching at my sides. "You really think you can bully me into giving you everything? After what you did?" She smirked. "Oh, I don't think, sweetheart." "I know." It was then I realized what I was really up against. This wasn't just a divorce, it was war. I didn't think Lindsay could surprise me anymore. After the lies, the emails, and the legal ambushes, I thought I'd seen the worst of her. I was wrong. It happened 3 nights after the restraining order nonsense. I'd been staying at a cheap motel on the edge of town, trying to keep my head above water while Melissa worked her legal magic. Around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed, a text from Lindsay. "I'm at the house. Don't try anything stupid." I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. She knew I couldn't go near the place without violating the restraining order, but the audacity of her message still hit like a slap. The next text came 5 minutes later, accompanied by a picture: Lindsay, standing in our living room, grinning like she'd won the lottery. And next to her? Eric. The damn dentist. Unbelievable, I muttered, pacing the tiny motel room. I called Melissa. "Can she do this? Bring her affair partner into my house while we're still legally married?" Melissa sighed. "Technically, yes. It's her residence, too, and there's no clause preventing it. But it's a bad look for her if we bring it up in court." Bad look? That wasn't enough for me. The next morning, I drove by the house, staying far enough away to avoid breaking the order. Sure enough, Eric's shiny sports car was parked in the driveway. My driveway. By the time I got back to the motel, I was shaking with rage. Not just because of what she'd done, but because I felt powerless to stop it. But then an idea started to form. If Lindsay wanted to play dirty, I'd show her just how messy things could get. The plan took 2 days to set in motion. I called a friend of mine, Caleb, who worked in pest control. He owed me a favor, and after I explained the situation, he was more than happy to help. That evening, Caleb and I parked a van a few blocks away from the house. Under the cover of darkness, we made our way to the backyard, where Caleb got to work. He wasn't planting anything dangerous, just a few tiny, well-hidden devices that would release an absolutely foul odor when activated. "They'll think something died in the walls." Caleb chuckled as he adjusted one of the timers. "Good," I said. "Make it worse in the bedroom." By the time we finished, the house was rigged to smell like a sewage plant during a heat wave. The next morning, I got a text from Lindsay. "Did you do something to the house? There's a horrible smell." I did not respond. A few hours later, another text came in. "Eric says we need an exterminator." "This is ridiculous. I know this is your doing." Again I said nothing. The best part? Caleb had set the devices to release the odor intermittently, so just when they thought it was gone, it would come roaring back. The cherry on top came 2 days later, when I got a call from Melissa. "Lindsay's attorney reached out," she said, her voice dripping with amusement. "Apparently, she's demanding a temporary relocation clause because the house has become uninhabitable." I grinned for the first time in days. "Tell them I'm happy to accommodate. As long as she agrees to let me move back in." Melissa laughed. "I'll see what I can do." I didn't expect Lindsay to back down so easily. That wasn't her style. So when Melissa called me the next day to say Lindsay had agreed to the temporary relocation clause, I knew she had something up her sleeve. "Don't get too comfortable," Melissa warned. "People like her don't give in without a plan. Just keep your head on straight, and let me handle the legal stuff." Easier said than done. By the end of the week, Lindsay had moved into some swanky downtown condo, no doubt on Eric's dime. She made sure to post plenty of pictures online, her sipping wine on the balcony, him pretending to be charming in his pastel button-downs. She even tagged me in a couple of the photos with captions like, "Starting fresh." I ignored it all. Or at least I tried to. But the final straw came one morning when I stopped by the house to pick up a few things. The smell Caleb and I had planted had finally dissipated, but I wasn't there to savor the victory. I was there to get my grandmother's quilt, some old photo albums, and Max's favorite chew toy, things Lindsay didn't have any right to touch. As I was walking through the living room, I noticed something odd. The mantel above the fireplace, once filled with our wedding photos and mementos, now looked like a shrine to Lindsay. Every picture was of her, and in the center of it all was a brand new framed photo of her and Eric, smiling like they were posing for a toothpaste ad. I couldn't stop myself. I grabbed the picture, marched out to the backyard, and tossed it straight into the fire pit. Watching it curl and blacken felt better than it probably should have. But as I stood there, a thought hit me like a lightning bolt. Lindsay thought she was untouchable, but she'd forgotten one key thing. I knew her secrets. All of them. And I still had one ace up my sleeve. Underscore 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 underscore. The next few days were a blur of preparation. I dug through old files, scrolled back years in our text history, and even pulled out the dusty storage box from the garage where Lindsay had kept her scrapbook phase. Buried among the photos and ticket stubs was a receipt. Not just any receipt, a detailed invoice for a certain spa retreat Lindsay had gone to a few years back. Except, it wasn't a spa at all. It was a cosmetic surgery clinic in another state. She'd always been self-conscious about her nose, and apparently she'd decided to fix it. The funny thing was, she'd never told anyone. Not her friends, not her family, not even Eric, as far as I knew. I snapped a photo of the receipt and sent it to Melissa. "Do we use this?" I asked, half expecting her to tell me it wasn't relevant. Her reply came quickly. "Not yet. But keep digging." So I did. And what I found next made the surgery receipt look like child's play. It turned out Lindsay had been playing fast and loose with the joint bank account for years. There were unexplained withdrawals, payments to what looked like gambling sites, and even a charge for a luxury handbag she'd sworn was a gift from a friend. The cherry on top? A Venmo payment to some guy named Brandon, with the caption, "Thanks for the wild weekend." When I showed it all to Melissa, she leaned back in her chair, grinning like the cat who caught the canary. "This is going to be fun." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had the upper hand. Lindsay had underestimated me, thinking I'd roll over and let her walk away with everything. But now I was ready to play her game. And I wasn't planning to lose. The plan was simple: don't let Lindsay know I was onto her until the perfect moment. Melissa agreed that timing was everything. If we played our cards right, we could not only keep her from walking away with more than her fair share but also expose her for who she really was in a way that would leave her spinning. But keeping calm when I was itching to strike back wasn't easy. 2 days later, I got my chance. Caleb called me. His voice barely contained his glee. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Lindsay's out at some event downtown. Guess who's with her?" I didn't have to guess. "Eric?" "Nope," Caleb replied. "Brandon." That was new. I thought Brandon was just some random name from her Venmo transactions, but seeing him in person was something else entirely. Caleb managed to snag a blurry photo of them at the bar together, looking far too cozy for someone supposedly in a committed relationship. It didn't take long for Melissa to turn that photo into something actionable. With some light digging, she found out Brandon wasn't just a fling. He was a regular occurrence in Lindsay's life. A connection to her gambling habits, too. "Here's the deal," Melissa said over coffee the next morning. "We've got enough dirt to bring her to her knees, but we don't need to blow it all at once. Let's see how she reacts if we just tease her a bit." "What do you mean?" She smirked. "Let's plant a seed. Something small. Enough to make her squirm." That afternoon, I logged into the anonymous Instagram account I'd made years ago. Lindsay had no idea it existed, which made it perfect for this kind of thing. I uploaded the blurry photo of her and Brandon with the caption, "Guess the perfect marriage isn't so perfect after all." #caught. I didn't tag her. I didn't have to. The account already had enough followers in our social circle that it wouldn't take long for the post to reach her. Sure enough, within hours, Lindsay's social media exploded. Her usual stream of glamorous posts came to an abrupt halt, replaced by radio silence. It was only when Melissa forwarded me a screenshot of Lindsay's frantic text to Eric that I knew we'd hit a nerve. "Lindsay, who's posting this crap? It's obviously fake. You know that, right?" "Eric, It better be. We'll talk when I get home. Hook, line, and sinker, Melissa said when I called her later. Now we just wait. She'll try to figure out where it's coming from, but by the time she does, we'll have already moved to the next phase. The next day, I got an unexpected call from Lindsay. Meet me, she said, her tone sharp. We need to talk. Alone. I agreed, curiosity getting the better of me. We met at a coffee shop neither of us frequented, neutral ground. She arrived first, wearing oversized sunglasses and a trench coat like she was auditioning for a spy movie. You think you're clever? She hissed the moment I sat down. Posting lies about me online. I sipped my coffee, feigning innocence. I have no idea what you're talking about. Her jaw tightened. Don't play dumb. I know it was you. Maybe you should ask Brandon about it, I said casually, watching her face flush crimson. For a moment, she looked like she might throw her latte at me. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice low and venomous. Listen to me, and listen carefully. If you think you can ruin my life, you're sorely mistaken. I will bury you. I leaned back, keeping my cool. You've been burying yourself for years, Lindsay. I'm just making sure everyone else sees it too. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her bag and stood up, but she didn't say another word before storming out. The coffee shop fell silent, all eyes on me. I could feel my pulse racing, but I forced a smile and took another sip of coffee. One thing was clear, the game had officially begun. And Lindsay? She was already on the losing side. I leaned back in the hard conference room chair, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Lindsay sat across from me, looking exhausted, her once perfect hair now a mess, her usually sharp eyes dull with fatigue. Eric sat to my left, and Melissa, the ever-smug attorney, scribbled notes to my right. This was the showdown we all knew was coming. Eric broke the silence first, his voice even but sharp. Lindsay, let's stop pretending. This isn't about love or loyalty anymore. This is about damage control. So what are you going to do? She winced, her hands fidgeting nervously in her lap. I just want this to be over, she muttered. Over? I snapped, my voice laced with disbelief. After all the lies, the manipulations, the games you played with all of us, you think this is that easy? She looked at me, her lips trembling, as if she wanted to explain, to justify it, but the words wouldn't come. Eric leaned forward, pushing a sleek folder across the table. Here's the deal, you're signing this agreement. No lawsuits, no publicity, but you're walking away from everything. The house, the apartment, the bills, all gone. You're starting over, Lindsay, but you're disappearing from our lives. She froze, her eyes darting between Eric and me. And if I don't? She whispered. Eric's jaw tightened, his tone cold. Then I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are. Your family, your so-called friends, the press, they'll all see the truth. Every check, every lie, every betrayal. The room went silent. Lindsay's face went pale, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Melissa, of course, couldn't help but add fuel to the fire. You need to think twice, Lindsay. Now is not the time for another one of your escapades. Lindsay's hands shook as she picked up the pen. Tears streamed down her face as she signed the document. She pushed it back to Eric, her voice barely audible. Okay. You win. Eric didn't even look at her as he stood up, the folder tucked under his arm. It's not about winning, Lindsay. It's about finishing. Without another word, he walked out, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. I gathered my things, ready to follow. Melissa leaned over, flashing her signature smirk. Need legal representation for the next chapter, Evan? I'm available. I shook my head. No, thank you, Melissa. I'm tired of you too. I stepped outside, the crisp evening air hitting me in the face like a wake-up call. For the first time in years I felt free. The chaos, the lies, the toxicity, all of it was behind me now. As I walked to my car, I looked up at the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Lindsay was starting over, Eric was recovering, and I was finally moving forward. The future was unwritten, but this time I wasn't afraid of a blank slate. P.S. I'll have to give Melissa a hard time sometime. If anyone finds my story useful, I'll be glad. Smiles to all friends.